Right. Kev, we need to get stuck into the share apologies for yesterday. Yeah, let's get into it quickly.
Okay, so just something from the Shmirat Shabbat in terms of now we always have to be reminded of this. It says in terms of business affairs, people uh, like to talk about their business deals, etc., on Shabbat, and they shouldn't do so. It says here in Nehemiah, one may not engage in any business activity on Shabbos, even if no malacha is taking place. The Prophet Nehemiah describes those who buy and sell on Shabbos as desecrators of Shabbos. So buy and sell, maybe buy and selling their words. Maybe that's it doesn't. There's no other explanation here. Um, but your mind's end of the day, Shabbos is a break from the daily, weekly routine, and business is the daily, weekly activity, which so one should try avoid thinking about it, discussing it, and the like.
Okay. What had to happen at a certain point in Jewish history? I'm not saying when people never took Shabbos seriously and then Slavchat sacrificed his life to show what would happen if you broke a if you broke Shabbos. In fact, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even know what to do with him. So he put him in a cage, and then obviously he was judged, etc. But he did it not because he was wicked. Many opinions say he was a tzaddik. He was sick of every people breaking not only the laws of Shabbos, but the spirit of Shabbos. So then we had different periods of Jewish history, certain periods they would keep the letter of it, but not the spirit of it. You know, you could technically do business by discussing a business issue or saying, I'll buy it for this and I'll sell it without money transferring hands. And therefore, we bring at certain parts of Shabbos that you have to have befitting speech where you talk about things that are appropriate for Shabbos and develop a certain sensitivity. All right, let's go straight into the Gemara. So there were two parts of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah had this issue, if you remember, about testifying against a man that he owes his fellow 200 zuz, and they were found to be conspiring witnesses, and they received lashes for their false testimony, and they paid the victim the amount they intended to make him lose, um, because we learned that the scriptural verse that makes them liable to lashes is not the one that makes them liable to payment. Um, so, because that's the case, both penalties are derived from two different verses and both must be carried out. Those are the words of Rabbi Meir. Now, the sages, the rabbinical opinion doesn't agree. It says whoever pays does not receive lashes. A person cannot be liable to both lashes and monetary payment for violating the same prohibition. Okay, so already the argument is on twofold, is that it seems as though it's the same prohibition, even though they're two different verses. Um, and there's certainly only one punishment according to the rabbis, which in itself is a bit of a difficulty. Second part of the Mishnah saying, look, we testify about this man that he's liable to 40 lashes because he broke any of the negative biblical commandments that are subject to this punishment. We a classic example is muzzling a animal that the animal can't eat, and therefore that sort of action that's actually mentioned is a prohibition of a negative commandment, which is why one of the subjects that are going to come up is since we learn that lashes are generally appropriate for action-based negative commandment breakage. It doesn't mention anything about speech, which would seem to be excluded. That's another issue in the Gemara. And they found to be Zomimim. So accordingly, Rabbi Meir said, you know, again, each witness is going to receive two sets of 40 lashes. One for breaking the commandment of thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. That's in Shmot, Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. and the second one for the biblical derivative, and you shall do to him as he planned to do to his brother in Devarim, which is Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19, which is the general Hazama penalty. The sages say they only receive 40,
share it or Damon.
mute, guys, if you're going to talk. So they receive only 40 lashes according to the rabbis, because what did they actually break? The Hazama punishment of what they intended to do to their victim is done to them, but there's nothing for transgression or about the prohibition against false testimony. Okay, so a couple of issues that the Gemara is going to go through here, as you know. One of the issues is as follows, is that the big question is why money versus Makkos? In other words, we learned Kimle B'di Rabbamin yesterday. Thank Hashem, I'm feeling a lot better yesterday, so if I sounded slurry, I'm just trying to clarify. We've always learned up to now that if there are two punishments caused by a simultaneous act, the more stringent one atones for both. Since we learn this with capital cases of Sanhedrin, we choose the more stringent simply because it covers both capital crimes at which that person's entitled to the death penalty, and you can't kill him twice. So there we certainly have an issue. We also have Kimle B'di Rabba Mineh, because there are certain transgressions which could incur, like kares and a death penalty, and corporal punishment, which is lashes and the death penalty. I'm not going to go through krisos now, which is kares. There's 39 cases of kares, as far as I know. It's a masechta on its own. But bottom line, if there's Makkos and the death penalty, we waiver the lower penalty in favor of implementing the more stringent one, because we don't punish a person twice. So we see this theme going through the sages, and the same for a monetary payment. We would think, what would we think? If there are lashes as well as a monetary payment, then what do you think should take precedence? We would think the Makkos, because Kimle B'di Rabba Mineh, the lower penalty is forfeited in lieu of the greater penalty, which atones for both. So we see it's not the case. The rabbis say it's about a payment, which means a couple of factors. Is that firstly, why? Why? So what we're going to see is that there was that statement, if you remember, that they brought I can just, if you remember Devarim chapter 25 verse 2, it basically said, in accordance with his wickedness. What does that mean? You can hold him liable for one wickedness, but not for two wickednesses. In other words, you can't subject him to two different penalties for one deed. So the Gemara was basically saying, look, let's look at the word, and I showed you this on screen share, rishato, which is a singular form, implying that when lashes are called for, he can only be held liable for one payment. Okay? We're saying that would certainly explain the secondary case of the Mishnah, according to the rabbis, why they don't give him two sets of 40, one for thou shalt not bear false witness, and one for you shall do to him as he intended to do to his brother, and said he did a negative commandment, and they were proven to be Adam Zomamim. So that's how the rabbis hold. But we've got an issue, which is mentioned in Kesubos 32a, is that you basically can't receive two penalties. What's the proof? Kimle B'di Rabba Mineh. We give somebody one penalty. So the problem that we have is the first part of the Mishnah. Why do we have a problem with the first part of the Mishnah? Because why should you choose money as a lighter penalty as opposed to lashes? Surely the more stringent covers both. So we don't have a problem with the second part of the Mishnah, because it was lashes for bearing false witness, and it was lashes for that's what you intended to do to your brother. So fine, you get punished once. We understand the rabbis. They're both the same punishment. So in the first case of the Mishnah, where there's money and lashes, why do we choose the lesser? Well, two simple reasons that the Gemara is going to bring. The one reason is Kimlei B'di Rabbi Minai doesn't work. For the simple reason is some of the rabbis do not hold that anything non-action based gets lashes. There is a discussion, we learned this in 2b, but can we really say that non-action gets lashes? So there are people of the opinion, there are great rabbis of the opinion that said, thou shalt not bear false witness because there's no action attached to it. It is a negative commandment, but there's no action orientation. This also goes through in terms of Sanhedrin about this issue with regards to a blasphemer. It's mainly words. So we understand why, if there's a case of lashes and a case of monetary payment, they would choose monetary payment because, well, for non-verbal, then they would say monetary is not too extreme. That's one opinion. There's another opinion that states that we look at the microcosmic punishment for kasha zama. What's kasha zama? Is what you intended to do to your victim. It's the reciprocal penalty that the Eidim Zomimim have to pay. And although the greater category is thou shalt not bear false witness, it's such a broad term that it could have different effects in different situations. And therefore, because there's a specific pasuk, you shall do to him as he intended to do to his brother, it doesn't form a subcategory as such. Conceptually, it's a subcategory, but because it's got its own pasuk, it means what he intended to cost his brother in false testimony is done to him. And in this case, it's monetary. If it's breaking a negative commandment, it's lashes. So even those that have kind of an issue with the action part still say that that applicable verse is exactly what you intended to do to you, your brother is done to you. That's why we implement, even in those cases, the death penalty when that's what's intended, or lashes when that's what's intended, or monetary payment when that's what is intended to be done. So obviously, because of its own pasuk, we don't have to rely on thou shalt not bear false witness as a non-action. Because you remember Tosfot brought, thank you, Kevin, for making me aware of that. Tosfot, we got that first 27 pages for free, that he said, look, whichever way you do it, how do we explain lashes? You can either say it's kasha zama for Adam Zomamim or for transgressing false lashes. Either way, you're in safe company. So what we are saying is, since we can only choose one form of wickedness, it's lighter just simply because there's a specific pasuk that deals with the hazama penalty, which is kasha zama, which is the exact thing you sought, punishment you sought to have done to your brother. Is that all clear so far as to what's being dealt with here? So the Gemara is going to bring 2 points of argument. One of the things it's trying to prove is what? Are there lashes for a non-action? That's number one. The other point of it is, how does Rabbi Meir see that there's more than one punishment? And are there similar cases that would back up for Rabbi Meir that the Gemara can in fact use? And then where do the rabbis, if they hold one wickedness, they need to at a certain point prove that there has been a forewarning? Because when it comes to Makkos, lashes, or the death penalty, you need forewarning in most cases. So where does the rabbi get the forewarning from, and where does Rabbi Meir get the forewarning from? So let's just delve into the Gemara. These are all issues I got from Rav Simcha, because I was having quite a few hang-ups with certain things here for a change. Ula answers Rabbi Meir from a different verse, because where we were holding is, look, the rabbis, we can understand their position because they used the singular form of wickedness in the pasuk that you can't have multiple punishments. But we want to know why Rabbi Meir, what's his reasoning for mandating 2 punishments for the single deed? In other words, we know that he's mandating a punishment for the reciprocal penalty, whatever that may be, whether it's lashes in a case of a negative commandment or money in terms of that's what you sought to do to the defendant. and also for bearing false witness lashes. So what, in the bottom line, why does he not accept the scriptural derivation of the rabbis that one punishment is the limit? So Ulla answers that Rabbi Meir derives this rule from the following verse. Now, this is what Rav Simcha Steinhaus said in the Shir, is he said, look, don't make the mistake of thinking that Ulla ran to the defense of Rabbi Meir. That's not how the Gemara actually works when he was looking at Tosfot and the sources. The Gemara brings and says, look, we're seeing a similar case of certain similarities between Adim Zomamim and other cases, and let's see if they match up with their problems and the uniquenesses to each case. So the Gemara is bringing forward Ulla. At Matzah and Schottenstein, Ulla answers, but Ulla is answering on a different crime entirely. And what's that? From the law of one who defames his wife. So we said, look, it's a Nara, a girl in her first 6 months of puberty. She was staying at her father's house, and due to her young age, obviously she is still in his legal custody prior to marriage. He doesn't, as Arthur quite rightly said, want to end up paying the divorce fee and giving her a ketubah. He thinks it's easier to get her killed. Nice guy. Anyway, he said she was unfaithful during the betrothal period, Irusin, and brings false witnesses, etc. But we're not dealing with those false witnesses. We are dealing with him now, him specifically. And we're saying because this is such a wicked crime, the false, what does he have to do? He gets, this is in Kesubos 46a, and this is brought in the Pasuk in Deuteronomy Devarim chapter 22, verse 13 to 19. So what happens is that he has to get lashed, 40 lashes, it's actually 39 minus 1, and he's fined 100 silver shekels to the girl's father because he was caught before this was done. In terms of what happens to the Adam Zolomim, I think they get the death penalty if they're at that wonderful sweet spot where they're discredited after verdict before sentencing. If it's before, they don't get the reciprocal punishment, but they can hardly wait to what's going to happen to them in the world to come. And don't think that this necessarily means this is all the husband's going to suffer. Firstly, he can never get divorced from this girl. So generally, a person's not that unhappy with his bride after 6 months. Don't worry, after years, he's very unhappy. But in the beginning, he's not really that unhappy. What happened is maybe another girl came on the scene. It's often the case where that's the case. So in this particular case, we have to learn it from a person that defames their wife. So there's two punishments. Okay, what is that? He carries lashes and pays. Carries lashes and pays 100 silver coins. So what is the Gemara trying to prove here initially? It seems as though the Gemara is trying to prove, Arthur, everybody, are you guys with me? I've done a lot of research for this. I just want to know if you're with me. None of you totally look with me.
No, we're doing our best. We are.
Okay, I can see people multitasking though. I know when they're not.
No. I've got a machine for my back. I was just resetting it.
But something that I'm wondering about. So he's not able to divorce her, but now I'm thinking, is she stuck with him for the rest of her life? Because I don't think she would want to be with him if he's such a kind of person, acting and doing things like that.
Listen, it's not the scope of this show. I don't want to get too distracted because we've got a lot to cover. But we're going to deal with issues of getting and divorce. It'll come up at a certain point of Gemara. But let's just focus. Sorry, but there's so many good questions, but we need to focus on the questions at hand. Kevin, last.
Damon,
That was my
just you said
question as well.
earlier that you were talking about the more stringent punishments,
Yeah.
either lashes or monetary payments. But isn't that a subjective? How does one ascertain which one is more stringent? It could be could vary from person to person. How is that?
I think Kevin's brought up a good point. I don't want to get too sidetracked, Kev, because what the Gemara is trying to do is bring an example of Ula at a case where we see with the defamer, which is a non-action. It's merely defamatory speech that you get to get lashed and pay. So this would seem to be a case very similar to Adem Zomimim, where you get lashed and you pay. Lashes for false testimony and paying not as a result of a fine, because that's what you intended to do to their victim. So I don't want to get too sidetracked, but to answer your question, I don't know if it is that subjective. For simple reason is that I think there might I don't know whose judgment call it would be, because the Gemara, the sentencing and the verdict is exact. I think we know that the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin, metes out punishments according to the crime. If you're asking what's a little bit heavier, I suppose if you've got no money and you're going to go to indentured servitude, it's better to get lashed and have it over and done with. If you're asking me personally, if it's a question of money versus lashes, it depends of how much it's going to cripple a financial future of the person being charged as opposed to a person being lashed. If a person's of bad health but very wealthy, I'm sure they'd be happier to pay. I think if they hardly had any money, but they had a back like a lion and they were super strong, they would want to go for that. But I don't think the decision is up to the defendant. I think certain crimes have certain punishments. All right, Lance, what were you going to ask before we go on? I don't want to get too sidetracked.
No, it's fine. I had the same question, the same comment as Brendan, thinking that about the guy can't divorce her, but she wouldn't want to be with him, and it seems to be pinning it down to this guy.
Well, I find that Brendan and you are correct. I tell you what upsets me more, when you have a rape case, that when he rapes this woman, he has to marry her. What does she want to be with an oak like that for? It was an issue I brought in the Gemara share, and everybody looked at me like I was the stupid one. You know, sometimes I think people go with the flow of the Gemara share, and that's what I've got to give you guys 10 out of 10 for. You've got no qualms about giving me age when you should, and I'm happy about that. But in many Gemara shiurim, there's so much pressure that if you ask a silly question, what they deem as silly, which is totally logical, that Brendan and you asked is, do you really want to get married to a person that they're so stingy that would rather get that you killed than pay a divorce settlement, or rapes you and now you've got to live with that person forever? I don't see why you would want to. And I don't see why you can't get divorced under those circumstances and would have to. Rav Simcha said to me that that girl is soiled goods now, so nobody would marry her in the case of I don't buy it. I don't agree. I'm sorry. All right, let's get back to share, because I've got a lot to cover, and the questions are good, but they're a little distracting to the sort of ground I need to cover. Sorry, guys. So what the Gemara is trying to do here is match a case where there is no speech involved. It's merely defamatory, same as what you would have for bearing false witness. It's not true. Same as Adem Zomimim. It's not true. It's speech, but it's not an action either. So this seems to be a matchup to Rabbi Meir in this case, where the person pays money and receives lashes. So it seems like the Gemara is bringing a pretty similar case from Ula, but it's not that Ula went to defend Rabbi Meir. The Gemara sets it up like that. Do you get what I'm saying? So that's one distinction Schottenstein made. So the Gemara asks the question, you can't compare this case of a defamer, which is a fine, and it can't serve as a model for Adem Zomimim. Okay, why? Because when you're dealing with a fine, it's got certain characteristics. What characteristics does it have? It's a fixed amount, like 100 silver pieces. Okay, that's your first thing to bear in mind. Whereas they're saying is if you Adem Zomimim is not that, because according to many rabbinical opinions, Adem Zomimim, in other words, what you sought to cost the defendant is done to you, meaning exactly what you sought to cost the defendant is compensatorily taken away from you because they don't discern the difference in legal process between the verdict and the sentencing. At that point, when the verdict is what you sought to do in damage is done to you, therefore it's seen as compensatory in nature. So the Gemara is asking from the rabbinical standpoint, not Rabbi Akiva. But in this particular case, the Gemara replies, listen, it can, and what's the problem if it is a fine? What's the problem if it is a fine? Well, we said what the problem is that basically is if you learn that if you damage somebody's property and the amount changes, it doesn't matter. Whatever you sought to damage is taken from you to be able to do reparations. Okay? And therefore you can learn that principle, whether you back into somebody's car, you hit their wall, or you ruin their holiday. The principle is this is what you cost your fellow Jew. This is what you have to pay for restitution. So that's a principle that can be carried over in compensation. A fine is punitive in nature. You can't always carry it forward because it's very circumstance specific. And therefore, how do you learn laws of compensation from laws of fines? They mutually can be exclusive, especially since they're fixed amounts. By your own volition, you can admit and not pay. So the Gemara said, don't worry about it. You've got good company. Because in this case, Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Akiva, who says that the punishment imposed upon Zumim witnesses is also fine, and therefore is comparable to the case of one who defames his wife. So what the Gemara is answering is, look, if Rabbi Meir is holding like Rabbi Akiva, and there's a certain case at which you have an opinion that Adam Zomimim is a fine, and a case where defaming the defamer is a fine, then you can learn the case of a fine from a fine. You can't learn the case of a compensation from a fine necessarily, but you can learn the case of a fine or from a fine, and you can learn the case of compensation to a fine, but not if they're too unique from each other, because you can't extrapolate any rules. So we're saying it's not a problem, because in this case there is an opinion that Adam Zomimim is a fine and the defamer is a fine, according to this opinion, right? So then that solves that particular query. So what's the issue? Is that we said Rabbi Akiva holds it as a fine because he said, listen, don't tell me about verdict schmerdict. Bottom line of it is the defendant never had to pay the money, because before he was made to pay the money, the Adam Zomimim were caught, and therefore it's a penalty to them to pay to the defendant. The defendant didn't lose his life in a case where he was accused of the death penalty, of costing somebody their life. He wasn't given the death penalty. He wasn't given lashes. He wasn't costed monetary. So it wasn't compensatory in nature in that point of view. Nothing happened to him yet. That's the only way that Adam Zomimim actually get a reciprocal penalty, is not before the verdict is given. And certainly it's after verdict, but before sentencing, which means nothing has actually transpired. So I actually see Rabbi Akiva's case sometimes more logically than compensation in nature. Just personally. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just we all have a personal bias. So then the Gemara brings the second version of Ulla's statement from a brisa. And I went to tell you where it's going to shift. Now it's shifting in gear, because the first thing it did is mention this case of a defamer to show you that it says, hey, there is a case where you get lashed and pay money. So that would seem to be a great support for Rabbi Meir. You get lashed for bearing false witness and you pay money. Okay, the case of a defamer, it's a penalty. But in the case of Adam Zomimim, it is a penalty, but it's what you sought to do to the defendant before you were caught. So therefore, it's almost a precedent, prototypical case of where both could apply. Now it's going to change gear a bit because it's using a different example. It says, hang on, we want to prove something different now. What do we want to prove? That in fact, this issue that's going to come up in the Gemara is, can you indeed receive lashes for a non-action? In other words, we accept this Deuteronomy verse that there's a reciprocal penalty. What you intended to do to your brother is done to you. So that's clear. If you intended to have him lashed, you get lashed, death penalty, monetary payment. But then why bring a second punishment of lashes? Because many of the opinion that if you refer to the ninth commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness, it's only for breaking a negative commandment that's action orientated. And the Gemara uses the example of muzzling one's animal where they can't eat, which is a positive act of muzzling, which says you're going to get lashed. That's the prototypical case. So now it's going to prove that you can, for not bearing false witness, even though there's not an action involved, get some sort of lashes like any other negative commandment that is action orientated. So it's trying to prove a different thing here, is that thou shalt not bear false witness, in fact, does have lashes. We don't have a problem giving it for the you shall do to him as he did to his brother, even though it's a non-action, because there's a special pasuk. But if it were not for that, we don't know if you could just do it for false testimony generally. You get what I'm saying? And that's the case that generally the rabbis hold that you don't, because before the verdict is given, if this one's got false testimony and they criticized by second set of witnesses, but the false testimony doesn't imply that the second set said the first set were not there to witness it. In other words, it wasn't about the person's character. It was about facts in the case. It's not like you're plotting against somebody. If you're not there, you're clearly plotting. If you have a different recall of events, you could be lying, but there could be a myriad of reasons. So it's not as sinister. So we're saying that in that particular case, why don't we figure out who's lying in the court case and give them lashes, because thou shalt not bear false witness? We say we don't generally do that. If they're two conflicting testimonies, they offset each other and we kick them out. It's only in an issue where the second set of witnesses said the first couldn't have been there in that location because they were with the second set of witnesses and somewhere else, that Adam Zimmerman kicks in. So then there's another point. And that point is as follows. Guys, give me 1 second, just pausing the sheet. All right, so the second point of the Gemara is bringing the following case. It says, look, there's those that taught Ulla's statement with regard to the following brisa. The Torah states concerning the consumption of the Pesach offering, you shall not leave over any of its contents until morning. And that which is left until morning you shall burn in a fire. That's in Shmot, Exodus chapter 12, verse 10. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, you've got a positive commandment, which is to burn the leftover, to follow the prohibition of leaving over that which you were meant to consume. Okay? And what it's saying is that whenever you generally have a positive commandment to remedy a negative commandment, you're not subject to get lashes. Why you're not subject to get lashes? Because if you steal money, you don't get lashes for stealing. What's the positive commandment? To return that which you stole. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's the positive commandment that offsets the negative commandment is the reason, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that you don't get lashes. And Rabbi Akiva is not disagreeing with Rabbi Yehuda's reason. What he's saying is that the reason you don't receive lashes for leaving over part of the sacrifice is because it's a prohibition that involves no action. What do you mean? Look, guys, the transgression doesn't result from an act, but from the failure to act. In other words, the failure to eat the entire sacrifice within the proper time constraint. And a person doesn't receive lashes for any prohibition whose transgression involves no action. Okay? So now it's bringing this case not of multiple punishments, but can you in fact get lashed for no action? We know Adam Zimmerman fine because you do to him what he intended to do to his brother. But what about this issue of thou shalt not bear false witness? Are there any lashes involved in that? Because what's the implication from the brisa? It can be inferred that Rabbi Yehuda, who requires the additional positive commandment to remove the penalty of lashes, holds that a person does receive lashes for a prohibition that involves no action. Okay, listen carefully. Rabbi Yehuda believes that any negative commandment, you do get lashes. It was only because there's an additional positive commandment to remedy that negative commandment to be able to burn over the offering meat that you were meant to consume is the reason you don't get the lashes. Okay, does that make sense, guys? So, in other words, according to Rabbi Akiva, some say Rav Yosef, that's not entirely the point. The reason you don't get lashes isn't because of this issue of a positive remedy. It's a non-action. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even an action you could get lashes for because it's still transgressing a negative commandment. The only reason you don't in this case is because there's a positive act to remedy the negative prohibition. And that's the remedy, not the lashes. Okay, we've got 2 minutes and 29 seconds left. Let me just cover a quick bit of ground. So some understood Ullah's point to be in response to the question that Ullah said he derived it from the law of one who defames his wife. So just as defaming is a prohibition whose transgression involves no action. It's merely defamatory speech, guys. It's not legally considered an action. And one receives lashes for it, so too one receives lashes for any prohibition that does not involve an action. So Ullah is going with Rabbi Yehuda and saying any negative commandment can get lashes. So it proves that for bearing false testimony, lashes you can get. Okay. And therefore would also in a separate case prove that you could get lashes and get a monetary compensation or penalty if you apply two different pasukim, because each one has a source for a different punishment. The rabbis say no, not because it involves no action, but because of the singular term wickedness. So we're going to deal with the refutation of Ullah tomorrow. Have made everything clear. Do you have any questions? We dealt with a lot of detail today, guys. A lot of nuanced detail.
A lot.
Okay.
You gave it over clearly.
Yeah.
Do we hear you clearly? We'll have to see.
All right, I hope so.
You, Damon,
Yeah.
you lashed it.
Where's my payment?
You can't give up.
Damon, truthfully, Damon, I feel beaten.
Yeah, the check in the post. Guys, have a lovely evening. God bless.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank God
thanks,
for
Yes,
running
thanks.
the bar.
Scott, thanks.
Thank God for that.